Okay, so let's get started, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the complimentary Nectari training, where we're going to be discussing what's new in V9, so Nectari version 9. And we're going to be also talking about our new component called the data sync and showing you guys how it could be beneficial. Let me just change the slide right here. So my name is Jean-Guy Cuerier. I know it's a complicated last name to say. I'm a senior BI consultant with Nectari for almost 5 years now, and we're going to be presenting to you guys today V9, like I said just a few seconds ago. During the presentation, please note that everyone's mics will be turned off during the webinar. If you guys have any questions at any time, don't hesitate to ask a question inside the chat. I will answer them as soon as they come in. So feel free to be interactive as much as you want, and I'll answer them as soon as I can during the presentation. So today we'll be really reviewing what's new in version 9. We're going to be taking some time to talk about the ETL data sync, the synchronization, replication, migration, and so on. And we'll also be talking about what are the steps for the upgrade process. And then we'll be at the end closing off with a quick Q&A. And also Olivia would probably be joining us at the end of the presentation to close off the 5-day session. Thank you again for everyone that was present for the other presentations. And this is the final one on that series of presentations. So let's jump into it and not take too much time on introductions, and let's start talking about really what's new in version 9. So the key features with Nectari version 9 for the web-based application is really the new look and feel. So it's completely redesigned the colors, the feel of the buttons, and so on. So we added some nice little look into the application. We also added a new online help to make it easier to look up for certain guides on how to do certain operations inside the application, and really there to guide you as best as you can a bit easier instead of going through PDFs. So it's completely web-based now with a nice search feature, and you can also go into historical, which I'll show you shortly after. We also added inside version 9, inside the OLEP manager, the incremental by date timestamp. So for some ERP systems, it does not necessarily support the creation of triggers on the database. So we use a new feature that we developed for the incremental by date that I'm going to explain a bit later also. We also added the capabilities of adding display pictures inside of different worksheets, being able to show application links and so on, and make the application feel a bit more dynamic when we navigate inside of it. I'm going to show you guys some examples, how to configure it, and so on. We also added a new defer update option for the manipulation of views that I'm going to show you guys exactly how it works and the capabilities of it. And I'm going to take the time to show you guys the new reporting pack features in the distribution module. So I'm just going to go over some of these slides so we can see, for example, the new look and feel of the colors. So blue, when we create a new worksheet, those colors will also be slightly new, in the layout of how the reports get created is completely new too. We also have the new online help that I'm going to go over with you a bit more visually, but we have our little friend at the top, Nectari, who can help you out with any issue that you might have with any questions on how a feature or a component works inside the application. We also have the hyperlinks and pictures that I'm going to show you guys how to configure, and so on inside the application. And let me just get out of here, and we're going to go straight into the application to show you guys how these features work. So right away, we can see that when we log into the application, the colors are slightly different. We now have a new logo for Nectari that's available to us. And one thing I always like saying is that that background image you saw is always an image that we can change inside the back end, where you can have a more customizable picture for anything that you might like. So whenever we open the application, we see that this is the new look and feel where we have that new Nectari logo, new branding that we have. And we have the command center with different buttons, but everything from V8 to V9 is relatively very similar. Nothing really has been misplaced. It's just a redefined look and a redesigned look to make it a little bit easier to see and a little bit easier to identify certain icons. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new worksheet or an original worksheet to show you guys what the original worksheet looks like and what they look like when we create a new one in the future now. So whenever we open this worksheet, you see that the layout is slightly different, where you can see that we have a proper separation between the groups, the pivots, and the columns. And it's just to make it a bit easier to identify where you are in that upper block. And we can see that the layout of the color is slightly different. Now, if I create, so for example, right here, you see you have the total at the top. You have a black color for the header grouping. But whenever we create a new worksheet, that whole layout is slightly different now. So if I say, for example, new view, and I'll create a view dynamically, it's now going to have a new look and features that we'll be able to play around with. So I'm going to do something very simple right here, where I'm going to say, for example, my group is a year. And let me go get maybe a quantity sold as a measure. What you'll notice is that the first time I open this view now, you'll notice that I have different colors whenever this view gets generated. So we see we now have that blue layout at the top. Sorry about that hover. We have, for example, the year, the information of the years, like always. And at the bottom, we have that unique color for the total line, and it's now at the bottom instead of being at the top. So by default, the worksheets are going to be created like this, so you don't have to go update them dynamically afterwards. So inside of here, you'll notice is that the colors are clean, crisp. I think everyone will enjoy this new color. It looks a little bit more like the colors in X3, and it makes it that whenever we integrate Nectari inside of X3, it seems a lot more connected together, so kind of like a team. That being said, the UI is relatively the same. So wherever you found most of your objects, you'll find them at the same location. So if I open the worksheet properties on the right, I have the exact same default structure that we have. So it's not necessarily completely different versus our other upgrades that we've done in the past. So you won't necessarily be lost going from V8 to V9 automatically. So at the top, what's new also is the new online help. I'll go over some other enhancements inside here, but at the top right, you'll see about, and it's now a completely online help, which you don't necessarily even need to have Nectari installed to access this help right here. So it's a help that's completely web-based, so even if the application is not installed, you can still access it to get some of the information that you might need. So for example, right here, I have it's multi-language for English and French. We have Nectari that's always there to ask for us to ask questions. And then what would you like to search? And we have a section on administration, end users, quick start, release notes, frequently asked questions, archives, upgrading, installations, and support. So there's really a full list of things that we can go to. And I can easily say, search for something, maybe top 5. And when I do top 5, it's gonna look, gauges, worksheets. It's gonna give me everywhere where there's top 5. And then I can say, for example, conditional, and it should bring me up everything for column formatting, KPI views, and stuff like that. So it's very intuitive to search through all of our documents to give you the most related articles with a drop-down list right here of everything that you can maybe go look for. We also have a drop-down list to maybe go see previous versions, to see what was been changed, enhanced, and so on. So it's really a more evolved online help versus going through different PDFs and so on. So we really add a lot of emphasis to make sure to give all of the info that you want inside of here. It also makes it, for us, a bit easier to give you guys more up-to-date guides, because we can just update our website dynamically and change certain things without you guys having to replace the PDFs that were there before. And it's really to make it more intuitive and easier to use. Perfect. Now when we're talking about back to the web interface, we added the capabilities of adding tracking by incremental date timestamps. So in the past, we developed for version 8 and late version 7 the capabilities of doing tracking by triggers that we place on the database to track all the modification, so that we're capable of doing incremental loads on the cubes. What we did with version 9 is we added more features inside the OLAP manager to be able to, for example, do an incremental load, but by date timestamp. So if I go into one of my OLAP managers right here, and I can show you guys exactly where that tracking is really quickly. And if I go, for example, in a cube that's offline, which is my sales, and I go into my data sources, we have a list of all of the data sources right here. By default, X3 is set up to use the tracking by triggers because the tracking by triggers can also take into account the delete statements. When we're talking about incremental by date timestamp, if ever there's a deleted transaction, that transaction won't get affected. The disadvantage of using by date tracking is the fact that you might have to every now and then do a load all to parse those deleted transactions. Technically, in financial, you should never delete a transaction, but you never know. So inside of the tracking system right here, what you'll notice is that when I bring the screen up, it's going to be set up by using the tracking by triggers, but it can always be switched to use by the date feature instead. The only thing that you have to take into account is that it doesn't parse the deletes, and that's something that you have to keep in mind. So right here, it's already by trigger. I can specify by date and add my key of my date. So it would be, in this situation, invoice D, and I can go get my updated date time, and then I can add a tracking key to make sure to update the proper records whenever it gets updated. This really was developed for certain ERP systems that do not work well with triggers, but it's always something that we can implement on certain customers where we don't want to necessarily create triggers on the database because of the massive volume of transactions. We've never really had issues with triggers with X3, but some other ERP systems had a few issues with them. So let me just cancel this. So the incremental is really to be able to not utilize the triggers on the database, and it's a different way to get that information across to us. Another thing that we've added to the web views is the capabilities of adding pictures coming from X3 inside the application. So inside of X3, we do add pictures sometimes to the item sheets. That is definitely something that we can do. So if I go into my dimensions and measures, I've already added it before. So I can go into my image file and attach it into my worksheet. So now I have my image that's located inside of here. And if I open up a group, it might take a bit of time to open because I have a lot of records inside of here, but it's going to give me a picture of that item at level of detail. So I'll just let it generate quickly, or if not, I'll just change the categories. So right here, I don't have my product code, but if I hover over it, I have that detail of an aspirin and so on. So I have a list of all of the pictures attached to those items inside the system. I could have specified a max for the product and so on. So if I bring in, for example, my product code into the system, and I open that group right here, you'll notice is that I can open an exact product and have that picture attached to it. And right here, I already did it where I specified a maximum and I did a subtotal restriction so it doesn't show itself at the higher level. So right now I have a bike pump, I have radius mountain wheels and so on. And we can see that picture pop up. So it's reading directly the information from X3 to make it visible for us to display pictures inside of a worksheet. So to do that, it's not necessarily super complicated. The hardest part is really knowing what table contains that information inside of X3. And once you know that information, it's very easy to add that picture to a worksheet or have it available for someone to use inside of a worksheet. So I'll just let this load up really quickly. The data model always takes a bit of time to load sometimes, especially when there's a lot of objects. And here we go. So I already know that, because I already did it, that the C blob table is the table that contains that image file that we can then bring into the worksheet. So what I did is I linked the identifier 1 to the item ref of my Z invoice table, which is a view that's created from the SCI template. So I linked my item code to the identity 1, which is equal to item ref. And sometimes you might have to link to this table different ways. And then inside this table, we have a field called blob, which is the image file of that item. So whenever I double click this little picture right here, I just need to specify that the format is image and that the format is raw, and it's going to bring in that picture for me dynamically. What I did on top of this here too is I also added a subtotal restriction so that I can have it at a certain level of grouping. So right here I'm saying only show this subtotal of output max at the level whenever I see the product code. So whenever I have a group of product code, I can actually see that picture there displayed. And it's just an easier way for us to see that picture without having to go to that final level of detail. So it's just a little added enhancement for us to see that picture. And what we can also do with this picture right here is increase the size of the default image that's there. So if I go into the worksheet properties, we have a new section inside the grid content that's called image height, where I can come specify the image height. And whenever I refresh this workbook, what you'll notice is that there's going to be a bigger padding between both cells or both rows so that it can accommodate that size image. So if I increase now 2017 to see a list of all my products, I'll now have that bigger image inside, and I can always export this here to another format to have that information. So if I say export to PDF and open, I'll now have what I expanded on my screen inside my PDF. I didn't do any formatting to the page yet, so we'll see what it gives me. It might not be pretty, but we'll see. And now we have that exact export of all those images attached inside of my worksheet. So everything is inside of here, and we get all the information that we just did, and we have also all of those pictures that are inside our X3 database. So it's really bringing everything that we put inside of X3 capable to report on and have very nice reports with actually the picture there. So it might be useful for someone doing shipping where they want to maybe see the picture before sending off to make sure that they're selecting the right part for quality control and so on. Perfect. And as we can see, what we export on the screen, when we export, what we see on the screen is what we export. So right here, 2018, 19 are not expanded because they weren't when I did the export afterwards. So when I go back to Nectari, I'll just close this tab of this image right here. We notice that we could add those pictures. It's not too complicated to add. But what we can also do is add a little bit more enhancements to this right here. So by maybe adding external links. So we already know that if we click on a product code, we can do a link to an external application or link to a specific field inside the application. So when I do application link right here, it's going to give me a list of all of the data models that I can link to, because I'm pretty sure you guys are all aware of this. but it's also going to give me access to the external applications that are configured to link to. So for example, maybe another application, maybe X3, and so on. And then I can link to those applications dynamically by sending the code that I have in question right here, BMS13, to X3 or to another thing. So for example, Google search. So it sends out BMS001 for me into that screen dynamically. So it's just an external link that we create, and it can be made available to us. Another way of doing this is by creating a hyperlink inside the grid. So I already did so, and I'll show you guys what I did to create afterwards. So right here, I have an item link to X3. So what I'll do is I'll just bring it in as my second level of grouping. And now when I open my group 2, I have that item link right here. So BMS, BMS004, and so on. And if I click on this link, it's going to open me my own X3 where I can log into X3, and it's going to open that item in question to go see the details attached to this information right here. And it's just a link that I created dynamically so that it takes the product code and opens me my information inside of X3. It could be a third-party application. It could be anything that you can open with an HTML link. So right here, I have my product that I selected, and it opens up dynamically. So I might have made a little mistake. It's in my link, but it should work relatively the same because I selected BMS, but it might just be that it didn't take it correctly. As I can see right here, everything looks good, but not the purpose. You can create a dynamic link to get to X3 dynamically. And to do so, it's not necessarily 100% complicated. What I did is I created myself a field, item link X3. And inside that field, what I did is I created a calculation that is basically calculating the href that I want. So an href, an HTML link. And then I'll just let this open right here. And right here we can see basically I'm using global variables that we have created so that I don't have to rewrite the exact TP10 my server name. And then I automatically generate this link dynamically so that it creates that field for me. And then it allows me to open X3 dynamically this way right here. It's something new, but it's to be able to make things a little bit more dynamic. And what's good is that whenever you export it, it also exports it correctly. So right here, if I look at BMS 008, it's going to export that correctly inside my end result right here. So right here, if I say export to this report and say export to PDF, we're going to see that it's going to say BMS 0015. And I'm curious to see if there's going to be a link to it too. So let me just open this worksheet view too, and then I'll have exactly what I had, but without the product code. Now, the product image is not showing up because it's only attached to the product code group right here. I could make it available for the item link too, but in this example, it's not there. So let me just wait for this to open. And right here, we see that link right here. It should convert it to the field, but I might have done something a little bit different that caused it not to. Okay. So it's a way to be able to link to different applications without having to necessarily do that click to go to that next section. Another feature that we've added inside of the web views is the capabilities of doing a defer update. For most scenarios, the defer update is not necessarily something that we notice because maybe the database is small and so on. But whenever we're talking to maybe working with a bit larger databases where it takes a bit of time to process the statement, the defer update is a fantastic little addition that we've added. So if I activate my toggle defer update, what you'll notice is that the screen goes a bit gray, where defer update, some functionalities has been disabled. So what that does is that basically I can bring in any field of my report, of my dimensions and measures, without it necessarily affecting my report. So right here, as you can see, it's not doing a refresh every time. And if I want, I can uncheck that defer update and it refreshes itself at that point. That being said, if I move groups around, it's going to refresh itself. So at any change that happens to the worksheet, it's automatically going to refresh that information. And it allows us to really play around with the worksheet without having it refresh every second, because we're adding multiple fields inside the worksheet. It's something that has been asked by a few people on the line, I believe, and we've implemented it in version 9 very recently. That being said, another feature that is available in the latest package is something that is completely new. And I'm going to show it to you guys really quickly. Let me just start by removing some of these fields, just so that I have exactly what I'm working with. So we have multiple different types of charts inside the system. We enhanced one of them recently to add a little bit more details onto it and have a little bit more indicators to make it a bit more user-friendly and make it a bit more, make it better in a way. So basically, if I change this view type right here into a donut chart and click OK, it's going to bring up the donut chart as how it used to always be. So we have that value right here where we have our information of 2018, our information of 2017, and 2019 is there, but it's very small. What we added to this type of chart is the capabilities of showing that total in the middle. So before, we didn't have that total be able to display here, but we added that control to this type of chart so that we can really see, okay, here is how it looks, and this is what the total of that pie chart is. So if I drill down, for example, in 2018 to see maybe my customer class as a drill down, I'll have that information of class 1 with 1.8 million. And then I can go into my chart titles and show information of my drill down to see exactly where I'm at that given time. So now I can say, for 2018, show me all my products. And this is not going to be pretty, but because there's so many products and it's going to create itself, but there's so many products inside the system that it's hard to really display all this information. So at this point, what you would do is you would specify, give me a top 10 of the information based off of the quantity sold, and put it in descending order or ascending order if you want to see your worst or best products. And click confirm. So now I have that top that I just assigned to it, and now I can see it a little bit better without having to see all of those different product codes. So this is a top of that information, and it shows us everything that we want to see. And with that 1.8 million, I can always drill down to one product, and that total is going to be displayed right here. So it's just an easier way to represent those values inside of these, inside this type of report view. Perfect. On top of that, inside of the web view, we didn't just enhance things on the view side of adding enhancements. We also made changes into the scheduler. So inside the scheduler, we added the capabilities of doing a new report pack. So basically being able to generate a report, a PDF with multiple different charts, worksheets, and so on. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to create one dynamically for you guys on the fly, where I'm just going to say consolidation. And I'm just going to go put this as a network drive really quickly. So I'm just going to put it on my C drive on a folder that I have called CSV. And right here, I can come select multiple different views, multiple different Excel files, and I'm going to generate them all into one Excel. So right here, I might want to say, give me simple gauge, a chart. I'm just selecting random objects. So maybe a worksheet. And then I'm just going to go into project costing right here. Just making sure, let me just take off the queues because I'm not sure if they're loaded on my environment right now. And let me just pick another one, GL transactions V6, and so on. So I'm picking multiple different reports coming from a bit of everywhere. And what we added inside of here is the consolidated report section, where we can create a consolidated ensemble of these reports right here into one PDF instead of sending 4 out. So right here I can say consolidated report pack. I can then add a cover page to add like a logo, a title page, play around with the title, add some global variables inside of here to make it a little bit more dynamic. I'll just let this load really quickly. And kind of like the report section where you can add a title. So right here I can say, center this information, report pack ABC. As an example, I can add an image. I can say, give me the current year inside of here and make it a little bit more dynamic by adding these informations and just clicking confirm. And now I have a cover page. I can also say, give me a table of contents so that we can see page 3 equals to which report. And then I can select the reports that I want. I can reorganize the order of how I want them displayed inside of here. And at the end of this, I can specify what user I want it to run for. So I'll just make it easy, send it as admin, say save, and then I'll play this report and it's gonna generate this consolidated report inside of a shared, inside of my C drive where I place it under the CSV folder. And I will let this run and it's gonna create me a consolidated report pack that's gonna put itself into one PDF instead of having sent 4 or 5 PDFs. So it's basically a way to consolidate all of your financial reports into one document. So we'll just let this run a few seconds. And while this runs, I'm gonna open my admin folder right here where I've done this a few times already. I'll just let it finish first because it's not finished at the moment. But it's basically gonna create that cover page. It's gonna create that table of content, and it's gonna generate us a report that will fuse itself together so that we only have one report to send out and someone can just open one file instead of having 5, 6 files on their emails, and a lot more dynamic and easier to read than opening 6, 7 tabs and having 7 tabs in your browser open. So, there we go. So I have my consolidated report pack right here that finished generating just now. I have my title page where I could add in more information. And if I go, I have my table of content of that report. And then one after the other, I have those reports that are generated inside of my worksheet based off what I requested and so on. So now I have every single of those reports combined into one final document of 7 pages. Instead of having 4 different emails, I have just one. Perfect. Okay. That covers most of the enhancements that we've done inside the web view. Before I move to the data sync side of things, does anyone have any questions related to the web interface? Okay, perfect. Doesn't seem like there's any questions right now. But I will mention one thing. If ever you guys find any things that you'd like us to implement inside the application, always feel free to send us an email with things that you feel that might be beneficial inside the application. And we tend to try to develop as many things that you guys request us. So if there's anything that's missing inside the application that you find, feel free to always open us a ticket as an enhancement request. And we're going to be glad to look at it, answer it, and eventually add it into the wish list / pipeline of everything that we want to add inside the application. Perfect. All right. So let's jump into the data sync. Before jumping into the data sync, I just want to share my presentation really quickly. We'll go over it of the different slides inside of it. And let me just press play and go to that slide because there's not that many. So give me 1 second. So let's talk about the data sync. So the data sync is a tool that we've created to be able to do transformation on the data. It's basically a tool that we developed to complement Nectari to be able to basically transport data from one point to another and perform transformation on it, and basically add a lot more value to the whole package. So it's basically an extra application that can sit on top of Nectari to do a lot of different types of operations on it. So for example, it's separated into, I'd say, about 4 different blocks. So the first block that we're going to talk about is really the synchronization. So the synchronization is used for a few things. So it could be used for building a data warehouse, building a replication of the data, synchronizing data to the cloud, or taking data from the cloud and bringing it on premise. It's basically a way to duplicate the data and maybe make it accessible somewhere else, or taking cloud ERP systems and bringing that database local so you can report off of it. So the different scenarios: on-premise to on-premise, on-premise to cloud, cloud to on-premise. So it's basically a data transportation tool to allow us to gather the information from multiple sources. And sometimes those sources might be sources that are not always accessible through an SQL connection, and making it available for us to report off. I'm going to show you guys a few examples later. One of the examples is also utilizing a web API to get information. Like for example, the example I'm going to show you guys later is COVID data. So be able to report off of COVID. We can go get exchange rates. We can go get data from a bit of everywhere, as long as there's an API module attached to it that can shoot us the information. We can get that and build reports with it. So on top of the synchronization, we have the data transformation. So we have an ETL module where we can transform the data to match something a bit different. So maybe we're taking data from a legacy database and we need to format maybe the country code. The country code in that legacy data can be CAN instead of CA. So we can perform a transformation on top of that with one-for-one mapping, type transformation, and also creating calculated fields on the fly to maybe add extra digits to the customer code because it's a little bit different. What's fun about it too is that we're able to synchronize the data through tables by using views, and also by SQL queries if we wanted to create something dynamic. So some key examples for this would be to synchronize maybe the X3 cloud using the Etna technology to our own Nectari cloud. Sorry about that little saying right there. Synchronizing basically Salesforce data into Nectari. Synchronize and transform legacy data, and so on. And basically then we use Nectari to consolidate that information afterwards. So I'm going to show you guys the synchronization really quickly. and then we'll go over the different topics at the same time of the consolidation, the migration, and after that, the CSV, being able to export it to CSV. So whenever we connect to the data sync right here, so this is the data sync interface, I'll just connect with my email address right here. So I'm logging, oh, it cannot be found right now, just give me 1 more second. Perfect. So I'm connected into the data sync right now, and I'm just going to go over the data sync and explain you guys point by point without necessarily going through that whole PowerPoint slide. So how the data sync works is really a transportation tool. So we'll go into the connection, for example, where here I have a series set of a bunch of source connections and some destination right here. So basically we're taking information from source A and pushing it to source B. Inside these source connections, we have multiple ways to connect to the data. So we can have an SQL connection, an Azure connection, RDS, Postgres, Salesforce, ODBC, Microsoft Excel, Google Sheets, QuickBooks, Intact, SpaceX, and custom API. So we now have like a little beta thing to say that this is not 100% official, but you can still use it. And I'm going to use some of these right here to show you guys a few examples. So right here, these are the source connections. And then we can decide what we want as a destination. So a destination could be on an SQL server, could be Azure, RDS, Oracle, CSV. And it's basically taking the information from source A and bringing it to source B afterwards. So right here, what I want to do is I'm going to create a scenario for you guys where I'm going to take maybe a Sage X3 database that I have on my on-premise, and I'm going to do a copy of it to create maybe an offline database where I can do incremental loads off of it. So right here at the bottom, I have an X3 V12 already set up, and this connection is connecting to my X3 database. And when I set this connection up right here, I have a date tracking. So how we do the incremental is by audit timestamp, so that we can get all of the information in the database and be able to do incremental loads of it dynamically. So this here, the synchronization that I'm going to do can be used in multiple ways. So right now, I'm just going to go into extractions. And what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to create an extraction that I'm going to take tables from X3 and bring it into my data warehouse. This could be used for multiple ways. One of the ways would be to maybe create an offline database for us to report off of. It could be a way to duplicate tables to be able to report off at different locations. So let's say, for example, you have users connecting to China, but your database server is in North America. That delay sometimes can cause the reports to be a bit slower there. So with the synchronization, you can actually sync that data to a cloud closer to them so that they can report off of data that's almost live, but with a much quicker speed. So that being said, I'm going to create a new extraction, but I could also import a template that we have. So for example, we have templates that are pre-built to be able to say, give me all of the tables from X3 and make a copy of it. So I'm going to take the import way, where I'm going to say, choose a file. So I'm just going to go into on my desktop where I have some of this information right here. So just give me 1 second, installation files, data sync templates. And right here, I have a bunch of data sync templates pre-built and pre-configured. So I'm going to take my main folder right here and bring it into my screen to import that template right there. So some of the things are already pre-built, and we can utilize them to accelerate the process. If you have a custom tables, we can add them afterwards and so on. So right here, I'll just click next. And it's basically asking me what I want to do. So I know right here, I'm going to do sync X3 to data DW for data warehouse. I can then specify how many tables I want to process at the same time. I'll specify 4. And right here, I get to see all of the connections that I have. And then I can say, for example, give me my Sage X3 V12. I can connect to any schema that I have on that environment. So see, then I'll go send it to a destination. So right here, I create myself a Nectari data warehouse training for us to connect to. And right here, I can say, maybe I don't want it to be seed anymore. I can make it something else. So these are everything that's accessible, but I can create something dynamically on the fly too. So right here, I can say SCI offline or seed offline and say save. And now I can say import this object right here. So it's going to import that template for us and bring in all of the tables that are pre-configured to have the primary key set up, to have the audit date attached to it, so that we can use this template and create an offline copy of our X3 database by running an incremental load and so on. So right now at this step, it's importing all of those tables for us. And now it has been brought into the system right here. So right here, I have that sync where it brought in my 160 tables. And if I go into the details of these tables right here, you'll notice that it's getting all of the tables from X3 and making them available for us to maybe do adjustments to them if we want to add a little bit more information to it. So for example, right here, I have a list of all of the tables that would be synced, and I can see how many fields are going to be synced right here. So I can also rename the destination. So Bud, maybe I want to do Bud offline, and so on. So I can rename the tables, I can make adjustments to them, and I can also create a dynamic SQL query to create a basically staging table of that information afterwards. So right here, I can say select star from C dot item master. And right here, the destination table, I can say ITM V, I'm just gonna give it a few letters different. And now I'm basically creating a dynamic table based off of a statement. It could have been a union, it could have been combining multiple tables, but it's taking that information and consolidating into one. So I can even add a filter to these tables to maybe exclude some of the data. So let's say, for example, you want to create an offline database, but you don't need 10 years of legacy data. You can add a filter to get the last 2 years or last year inside the system. So it's really customizing how you want to pull that data from that system and make it available elsewhere. So right here, I have all of these tables, and I can maybe go into BP address as an example, where BP address, I can go see those 39 tables. And now I can see what fields are being synced, what's the primary key of that table or primary keys. And then if I go a bit lower, I also have a tracking key set up on the update date time. What we can do on top of this right here is if I look, for example, for, let me see if it's there. Country code right here. So let's say, for example, we have the country code. The country code might be not okay in one of the systems. What I can go do is I can come create a transformation. And right here, I have some transformation already set up, already created. So I can select, for example, country 500. And that is basically a transformation that was created that I can utilize to map this information. So for example, I have a migration plan of getting 500 data to X3, and they're using a 3-coded digit, but we know that the ISO standard is 2-code. So right here, I can transform it with a one-to-one transformation of that information. And whenever it loads the table, it goes through this transformation to make that available, that data transform itself dynamically for us. It could also be done with an SQL statement and so on, but right here we can import a file, an Excel file that will do the mapping for us, and so on. So if I brought a file in, I can drag it and say, merge these data together or create a whole new set of records. So I'm just going to cancel this right here because I don't want that to be present right here, just because I don't need to transform it because I know the data is already okay. So let me go back to the extraction in question that we had. So we have the extraction that I created to data warehouse right here. And what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to go delete that view that I created. I believe it's under SQL, just because I didn't map the triggers and it will fail. So delete these tables right here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go build this extraction and load the tables so that we can see what happens. So I'm just going to build it really quickly. It's going to build the structure based off of the data that's there. So now when I open my Nectari data warehouse and open my list of tables, I'll now have all the tables that are there because it built the structure. And now what I can go do is I can go into this play button right here and run the extraction. And I'm not going to do I can do all the tables. So let's just click run. And what it's going to do, it's going to take all the data that I have inside my X3 database and transfer it to this Nectari DW data warehouse environment for me to report off afterwards. So then I would connect Nectari to that different database and maybe re-execute the scripts to have all of the views that we need to run reports. So now if I click refresh, it's working on all the tables one after the other, and it's going to bring in the data that we need. So if I open SQL right here and I go, for example, maybe G account and say select top 100, 1000. Just give me a little second. It's being used by another process right here. So let's give it a second. Let me just go company then. And then we can see that whole data was brought into one centralized location where we can basically take the data that we had on-premise and put it into a cloud reporting environment where we can report off from the cloud, or copy our database to another source where they can report off of that information, but a little bit closer to their location. So maybe copy a database from North America, put it into Europe, and also put it to China, depending on who's connecting. They'll go to a different portal and have the data closer, maybe not 100% live, but close enough because we can do incremental loads every 5, 10, 15 minutes to get all of the latest data up and running inside the system. So it's just a quick way to make a copy and transform that data into the cloud. With this feature right here, we're able to do multiple different things too. So right here, we saw that we were able to consolidate data to my data warehouse, synchronize that data to a data warehouse. We can also use this tool right here to do consolidation. So for example, the consolidation is taking maybe database company 1 and database company 2 and bringing them into one centralized company folder where you can do reporting off of one company instead of having separate environments. So this is mainly used for 300, but can also be used for X3 and any other system that we might want to consolidate the data inside of one data warehouse. So that being said, I'll do a quick example using legacy data that we have, or a database that I have on my system, which is Sage 300. I'm also going to use a template again, because if there's a template available, you try to use it. So right here, I'm going to go into a new extraction. where I'm going to say I want to do a consolidation, or sorry, import template. And I'm going to go back into my folder right here where I have what we call Sage 300 consolidation. So I'm just going to drag this in right here. And I'm going to say, perfect, I want to do a consolidation. And what's different between the synchronization and the consolidation is that we specify a certain field to be a unique key for that table to say that this is coming from company 1 or company 2. So right here, I'm just going to call it Sam Inc. because I have a database called Sam Inc. And I'm going to call the identifier Sam Inc. And I'm going to give it a unique column name of company console. Perfect. So right here, I can specify maybe 3 parallel extractions to do 3 tables at once. Then I can specify what my source connection is. And right here earlier, I created some for my 2 databases where I'm going to say, take my Sam Inc. 300 environment DBO and bring it into a destination of being my data warehouse training. And instead of going into the SCI seed schema, I'm going to add a new one and say, put it into maybe just so it's first, so A300, just so I want it to be the first schema in the list, and say save. So I'm dynamically creating a new schema on that table. And I'm just going to say import. And it's going to do the same operation of importing all of those tables inside the system. It's going to take a few seconds just to get that detail up and copied because it's reading that whole zip file to be able to import all these tables. So right here, we now have my Sam Inc. consolidation right here that's there that I can build and load. Before building and loading, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to duplicate it just because it's already there. And I'm just going to say Sam Ltd. I'm going to keep the copy there. I'm going to say Sam Ltd. And the unique field, I have to give it the same name. So CPY console. And voila. So now I have my 2 extractions that are created. And what's going to happen is I'm going to consolidate company 1 and company 2 together with the consolidation module attached here. So I'm just going to let this, it's just basically going to copy all those tables inside this extra source, and it's going to allow me to consolidate that data together. So one thing that I didn't show you guys earlier is that we can also use different APIs on the web, like I mentioned really quickly earlier. And it's just a question of getting that API file and loading it onto the system, kind of like what I did for the connection right here. So I have a COVID connection right here as an example. It's basically an RDS API that I imported into the system. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to configure that API to connect to a website to gather COVID data. So I did so, and I created an extraction to read that data inside my system. So right here, if I go, I have a COVID detail right here that was executed yesterday. And if I click confirm, give it a little second, I can see that I'm pulling data from an API and getting 11 fields from that API that I can go see. It's either it gets the country code and information like that. I could have got more details inside of here, but it's just to show you guys that even with an API, we can go get this information and make it available to us. So here, for example, we see I have how many the province is, who recovered, country code, and then I can use it inside of Nectari afterwards to create a report to see data coming from an API without necessarily having to do a lot of magic work with it. So here's a quick API of everything going on. And if I look, for example, at a given date of 2000 of the 6th, so I haven't refreshed it since. And then I can select, for example, Canada. And right here, the number is doubled because I have a province code that is at, basically the province is at null. So there's a province that's null to put all the values attached to that. So now if I close this right here and go all the way down to 2006, 2020, 6, and then I can open up, for example, Canada. And then I have so basically for whole of Canada, this is how much people have recovered, active, and so on. But we're connecting to an API to pull the data into a database so that we can report off of that information. So it could be used for getting exchange rate, it could be used for getting longitude, latitude. So any API that might be out there that you need to connect to a certain data, we can use it inside of the data sync to fetch the data to then report off of. And this is just one example with actual things going on in the world right now. And that's a date of 2 days ago. We can look at anywhere we want, any country, but it's just pulling the data from the web to make it available inside of Nectari to report off of. So that being said, I'll just go back really quickly to the extractions, where I was showing you guys the consolidation. So right here, I have SAM Inc. and SAM Ltd. I can validate and build both structures. So draw previously created objects or only add the missing fields. I'll do that. And it's validating and building the structure inside the SQL database. So if I did refresh, you'll see that information populate. And then I'll do the same thing right here, validate and build. And you have to do this process to create that structure before running the execution. So right now it's going to refresh. It finished loading completely. It's been validated. And oh, this one didn't validate. Let me just validate right here. Oh, it's already, there we go. It just finished. And now if I click refresh, it's validated. So now I can run the extraction and say truncate and load. And we have a bunch of options right here where I can say incremental load, process deleted records if ever there's deleted records that were there, and it's going to gather all that information for us. So right now I'm just going to do a little refresh and we can see that it's running, and I'm basically going to run this here in parallel, and it's going to load a consolidated database for us where it's going to merge company 1 and company 2 into one entity so that we can then connect Nectari onto that database to do a consolidated report. So if ever you have an X3 V5, V12, and you want to merge the data together, you can do so by maybe doing some transformation to it to bring the account codes to the same definition and so on. So now my first one finished, and we'll just let it finish for the second one, and we're going to go see the results inside the SQL database. So right here, for example, if I refresh this, since I specified A300, I did it for a reason so that it is the first one in the list. And now if I do, for example, you guys might not know these tables, but if I do a select of one of these tables, we'll have data coming from SAM Ltd and also SAM Inc. So it's merging those two datas into one point of action. So it's really there to consolidate the data dynamically. And if I do refresh, it's going to be done successfully. Okay, perfect. So that being said, I'm going to skip the consolidate part because it's basically to merge the data together. It's pretty straightforward. So let's talk about the migration, which is the most interesting point that we can do with the data sync, is to help you migrate information, help you make systems intercommunicate with each other, and really allow us to make Nectari very, very powerful. So like it says right here, it's to help migrate data between two systems. It can interface between systems to be able to say, take information from system A and update system B with it. So examples for this, it could be having a customer working in Asia and updating the data from North America to Asia whenever it's there so that they have an on-premise database. Basically, you can have a third-party application for another example, like a Salesforce, where someone enters customer details and you want to update into your X3. That's something that can be done too. we can have a Google Sheet with a product or customer where you can maintain the description of that and have it update into X3. With that, we can do data transformation, do calculated fields, and do some value mappings attached to that. So I'm going to show you guys a few examples of what we can do with this right here. One of them, I'm going to start off very simple that I'm going to create it with you guys on the fly. And just to show you guys how it works, how easy it could be, and really to show you guys like the value of having the migration inside of your environment. So what I'm going to do as a quick example is I'm going to open up an Excel file to show you guys what I have inside this Excel file. I'll have to ask you guys to use a little bit of your imagination because it's not necessarily a very detailed example, but it's very precise. So right here, I have a beautiful Excel file with a list of item codes. There are descriptions 1, 2, and 3. And I might want someone to update this information to say training, Canada, and so on, where I'm adding descriptions into this Excel file. Let's say I want to take this Excel file and update X3. I could do so. That being said, you can use it with Salesforce to say whenever I enter information in Salesforce, update my X3 address and so on. It's all things that you can do, but it's there to really help us make two systems communicate with each other. So that being said, I have this CSV file right here that's called ADR XLSX. And what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go into the data sync and create myself a new connection. And I don't know if I have that connection up and running already. I don't. So I'll create a completely new one where I know exactly where this information is. I create it under my folder right here. So I'm going to say connect to an Excel file, and I'm going to call it item file. I'm going to specify the file path right here, where I can come specify, rename the table, and let me just say right here, rename this so that I can just copy it, XLSX. So I'm just going to paste it right here, .xlsx. And right here I can say, does your sheet contain header? Yes or no? Yes, it does. Read it as empty. Perfect. I can add some tracking onto it if I want to, but I'm just going to click save for now. And I basically just created a connection to that Excel file so that I can now use that connection to do a migration or to pull the data from it to bring it somewhere else. So now I have, let me just try to find it, my item file right here that's there. And I also created a source connection that I created beforehand, which is my X3 database right here. So I have my X3 database as my source destination. And right here, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to build a new extraction where I'm going to say new extraction. I want to do a migration plan this time right here, where I'm going to specify next. And I'm going to say update as a description, update X3 item description. I'm going to have one parallel extraction. I'm going to specify that I only want to do an update because I don't want to insert data into this table at all. And right here, I'm going to specify I'm working with my item file as my source, and my destination is going to be my X3 production server. And I'm going to connect to my seed folder, which is my folder of that database right there. So I'm going to create, and now I'm just creating this dynamically on the fly. It's going to give me my two sheets that I had. So if I open up this Excel file, I have sheet 1, which has a bunch of customer information, postal code, and so on. And I have my sheet 2, which is my items. So I'm going to go back to my file and say, I want to take my table item. And this information is right here where I can say my destination table. I'm going to open it and it's going to give me a list of all of my X3 tables. So right here, I'm going to search for item master. And now I got to go map those fields. So I'm going to go into the mapping of that destination, where right here I can see I have a row ID that I don't need. My primary key of this is the item ref, where I'm going to say sync, or I'm going to say item ref is the key. And right here, I just need to specify the destination. So I'm going to say item ref equals to item ref, item des equals to item des1. One second. Item des, this one right here, perfect, and so on. And this one right here. So we can see that this data is being synced. My primary key is my item reference. And now I can click save. It's going to give me a little precision loss, but that's okay because I have a source of 2000 with a destination of 30 and 20, but that's okay. I won't exaggerate on my titles. And now I can go back to my extraction and I can say validate and build that structure. Click confirm and refresh, and now it's validated. And now I can say run extractions, which is going to do a load. It's done successfully. So now I'm not going to go inside my X3, but I created a quick SQL statement earlier, where right here, I can see all of the things that I put inside of here. And now if I look, for example, at the code that I updated, which is this one right here. So let me just save this information. And now let me just add a few extra things. So BMS 13, training, ABC, and click save. And if I go back to my synchronization again, and I say play, so my file is still open, but it's going to read that file. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that error right there. It is done successfully. So now if I do this and click refresh, I have my training ABC, my training Canada, that's attached there because I saved my file. So it's reading that file even if it's being used, but it's only reading if those data have been committed. And that could be working with other systems. So it could be taking Salesforce where you're entering a description or an address and then updating X3 afterwards. It's just a question of connecting to that data and doing kind of the operation that we did to say that my data from source A is equal to my data to source B and mixing that information together so that we can update this information. So right here, I could do the same thing and say for BMS 51, this is fantastic, and click save. And whenever I play this extraction again, it's now going to get that new description that I placed into here. So it's easier to maintain certain lists and making two systems interact to each other dynamically. So now it's done. So if I open up SQL right here and I go down to that item in question, this is fantastic. So it's a way to communicate between two systems dynamically by using the migration to really make your systems work together as a team. There's, of course, multiple different cases that you can build to get to this point. And there's multiple different ways of using this, but it's very powerful. And we typically use it to update things like this right here. Perfect. All right. Now that being said, we're going to go to a little bit more of an advanced test or an advanced case scenario. It's still going to be a migration, but with an export. So one thing that we know about X3 that's very good is the capabilities of being able to import files. So import a list of records inside the system. But the advantage of going through an import is that it goes through the validation process of bringing data inside the system. So right here, I have a few things that are inside my system. So right here, I have a few little options right here. So I'm going to show an example of migration of Sage 500 to X3. Okay. So right here, I have a connection of Sage 500. I have also a connection to that data warehouse to push the data afterwards into a CSV file. And right here we have an X3 import output folder where basically I have an output where csv.datasync where I'm going to push that data to. Okay, so to bring the data from Sage 500 to X3, we first have to prepare that information for us to take from 500 and bring it to X3. So taking 500 as an example, it could be an X3 V5, it could be a Sage 300, it could be any legacy database. I'm just using one where we have a template already set up for. So inside the extraction, we have our first extraction of taking the information from Sage 500 and preparing it into a destination. So for example, right here, if I go into the customer, I can see that I'm creating a customer table to push that data inside of it. So we have all of the information that we're pushing into a table with an indicator, certain destinations as columns. So right here we see all of the fields. They're not all mapped right now. So we can see, for example, template, table order. We can see indicator, column 1, column 2, key join. So it's really getting key filters from these tables and kind of creating like a base table for us to read off of afterwards. So if I go back here and I go back into that migration to that data warehouse, so we're preparing the set of tables with that information. So multiple different ones and multiple transformations attached to it to make sure that it transforms correctly into the destination. So right here, we're basically saying column 7, 8, 3, 4, 5, 1. So we're basically taking the information from these tables and placing them into columns, specific columns, so that we can generate a CSV file afterwards to import into X3. We're going to be building a lot of these templates to be able to take this information from one point to the other and making them available whenever we get to those points. So right here, if I go back to the data sync right here where we have this information, I'll go back to my Sage X3. So once that rolls, it basically prepares tables inside my environment to allow me to prepare that data. So it's basically just massaging the data to prepare it to create CSV files. So right here, I have my Sage 500 to X3, which is basically taking my massaged data and then putting it into a destination of a TXT file. So right here, I'll just go into the details of this right here. And we can see it's there to take the customer information. It's there to take the item, the salesperson, and it's basically reading that table to create what we have inside my data sync folder, which is X3 customer, X3 items. And if I open this with Notepad++, it's basically preparing it to import into X3 through the import tool. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to close this right here, and I'm going to run this extraction so that we can have new files created, and I'm going to then import it inside of X3. So I'm going to start off by just running the Sage X3 to the data warehouse and just doing play. So it's going to create, wrong one, sorry. I want to do the migration first of Sage 500 to this destination right here where I'm just going to say validate and build. Perfect. And right here, I'm just going to click play and run. So it's going to load these tables for me dynamically, and these tables are being created at the same time. So it's done successfully. So it took all of those mappings and brought them into, so if I connect to my database right here, and I go into Nectari Cube, which is my location for my data warehouse, and right here, in 1 second, I'll just refresh this information. So it's basically creating me an import staging table for all this information where I'm getting the information from certain templates and bring it into a final staging table that I'm then going to utilize to import into X3. So it's giving me column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And this is going to be used to generate those TXT files afterwards that we saw. So what it's going to do is when I go back to the data sync right here, and I go into the export, what you'll notice is that it reads that table, but it adds a where clause to say, retrieve me the template ITM DS, retrieve me the template BPC DS. So basically, we're going to have multiple systems that we're going to configure with these templates so that we can take the data from these points and bring them into X3 by this migration tool so that an upgrade process from going through a legacy system to X3 would be just necessarily configuring the source to map those fields accordingly, and then creating these TXT files for us dynamically so that we can import it into X3 afterwards. So since I have an X3 available to me, I'm going to do that operation with you guys right here. So I'm going to go into that Sage X3 to create these import files right here. So I'm just going to say validate and build. Perfect, just because it needs to be validated to run. I'm going to say play, run that extraction, click truncate and load, refresh this data. I'm just going to let it complete. So it's creating these new TXT files for me. Now it's done successfully. And if I open this right here, you see that it was generated just now. And I can then use these here to import into X3. So let me just go into X3 right now. And I'll go into my X3 environment right here. Just close a few tabs at the same time. Okay, let's try doing that again. Let me try opening a new tab, maybe. Okay, there we go. I don't know what was happening with it. At least it wasn't Nectari doing that. All right, perfect. All right, so now inside of here, we have our interface that we can go into. I think I have my favorite already selected because don't ask me where it is because I will not remember because I am sadly not an X3 expert. I can navigate pretty well inside X3, but I do have my limits. So right here, for example, if I want to import to rep data source that I created, so it's basically a template import that I've configured already. So I can say OK on this right here, and I can select the file that I want to bring into the system, which is under my CSV data sync and salesperson. And now I can upload this here into the system. I'm just waiting it to finish loading completely. Click OK. And I basically imported my information from my 500 into my X3. Now this could be done also with an automated, but right now I'm doing this manually so I can see the list of errors. And the good thing about going this way right here of going through these different types of files is actually the fact that it goes through the business logic of X3. So we're not just entering data inside the system without it being valid. We're really going through the whole process to make sure that that information is valid. Because X3 will reject it if ever there's an issue with it, which is very good because then you can look at the file and see what went wrong and not necessarily put garbage into the system. So right here we see everything, and at the end of it, do we have, so a total of 52 records were modified. So I'm modifying those updates dynamically. So it's updating the records that I have inside the system already, and so on. So if it would have been new records, it would have added them, but I already ran this script previously to add them into the system. So it's reading that 500 data, bring it into a data warehouse, so a staging area where we create a table where we have column 1 to 50, and then we create these dynamic files that we can then import into X3's system using X3's business logic with not much effort attached to it. So a lot of these templates will be built in the future to be able to do this, but it's just, this is one of the big examples of the migration on how it can help to upgrade a system, or how it can help to intercommunicate two systems. So for example, if you have two X3 environments set up and you're entering data in one and you want to update it to the other one, you can do it with this logic too, where you create these dynamic CSV files at every hour, 2 hours, and you have your other X3 read them dynamically so that you can have two systems up and running simultaneously to push the data into another location if wanted. Another case for this is for very big customers. You can also duplicate the data warehouse so that they can connect to their data cubes on an on-premise server instead of being a server maybe across the world. So there's a lot of things that you can do with the data sync to increase functionality and increase performance. And it's also there to try to help you save time in the future. So for example, if you have two systems to maintain, it's a lot more work than just having one. So you can use the data sync to make sure that when you enter information or you update information in one system, that you can sync that data to the other one with the least amount of effort possible, and so on. So the migration is that the export is kind of similar to what we just did with that that file right there. So we can always export into those formats that we have. So basically, you can do what we did and make a TXT file and import into X3, but you can also just do a data dump of that information. And it's very simple to do. For example, if I want to do a data dump of a table, I can simply just go into my connections. And I have right here, for example, this setting right here where I can go edit. We can see that it's an X3 import. We can see that we can deliver, change the limiter, change the quoted character, and so on, and play around with it right here. And what I can do with this right here is I can go into my connection and say, new connection, I want to create a CSV output of my data. Next. And right here, I can say test, do a quick test, connect to any one of my connections that I might have. Let's say, for example, I'll go to X3 V12 like we had earlier and connect to, let's go to my SCI seed folder, and my destination will be my X3 import, as an example. It's gonna go through my tool, and then it's gonna give me a list of all of my tables that I have, and I can take our famous Z invoice view that combines our invoice details with the footer information and so on. And then I can have a destination of being all these fields right here. So here are all my destinations, perfect. And now what I can do is I can go into my extraction and search for that test that I built, test right here. I can say validate and build, validate, it validated that information. And now I can run that extraction to populate that destination that I had. So that destination is running right now. It's going to read that whole table, and it's going to create me. So if I come right here, a CSV file of that export right there. So I basically create myself a CSV file of an export of that table, so a data dump of everything that I can schedule every now and then to run. I could have formatted it with the ETL attached to it and played around with it a little bit more so that we can get all that information attached to it. So now it's downloading. If I click refresh, it's done successfully. So I can open this table right here, and I basically did a data dump of that table going through the tool very quickly. So right here, I have no headers, but I could have included headers if I wanted to, but I specified not to do it in the connection stream. So right here, I could have had all the headers, and now I have a quick data dump of my database so that I can play around with it in Excel. Perfect. So with this right here, we have the scheduler. The scheduler is relatively easy to use. The big advantage of the scheduler is you can schedule one job and run multiple extractions at the same time. I won't go through all of the details of how to run a job, but right here you can specify multiple different extractions to run with one task, which is very good because it stops you from having to create multiple jobs to run at the same time. So here you can say, run these, and it finishes, and then you can activate it, but you can select multiple different tasks to run at once, and it makes it that it's a lot easier to use the scheduler. Inside the transformation, so right here we can see that we already have some pre-built transformation existing. So right here I can see, so blank equals XO, taxable equals NOR, and so on. So it's a mapping that you can come enter new values and basically utilize as a transformation tool dynamically. So right here, tax, ABC, and so on. So I can save it, and it updates itself dynamically with that new information. So it's basically like a one-for-one transformation that can be utilized in any table that you have inside the system right now. With this, there's logs, there's a bit of everything, but it's really a tool to guide you in transporting data from source A to source B with the least amount of effort and the most amount of precision that you can. And it's also there to help you do migration, to update, to make systems intercommunicate with each other. And it has a lot of added benefit to utilize in every day. Before I go talking about the next point, it's been a while since I saw a question. Does anyone have any questions regarding the data sync module? I know at the end of the session, there's going to be talking about promotions about the data sync. Do you guys have any questions related to the data sync? I'm going to keep it open for the questions open for 2 minutes, just to see if anyone has any question. Since there's no questions right now, but I will say something right now. With the data sync, the synchronization part of it is automatically available by default. But after the synchronization, the transformation, the consolidation, the migrations all have added expenses to it. But by default, the synchronization comes with Nectari. Just gonna wait an extra minute to see if there's any questions that shows up. Okay, so there doesn't seem to be any questions right now. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk about the upgrade process. Okay, so let me just open up my PowerPoint. I don't necessarily have slides attached to that. Let me just say, There we go. Okay, so let's talk about the upgrade process. The upgrade process is not necessarily a long process to do. It doesn't necessarily require a lot of effort. The only thing that you guys have to know is depending on the version that you're coming from version 8. So if you guys, oh, I think I have a quick question right here. Okay, so depending on the version you're coming from, there's a few things to take into consideration. So if you're on the latest version 8, you've already installed the framework 4.8. So a new requirement for version 9 is the framework 4.8. And before any upgrade, make sure to look at the online help to see if there's any requirements that you guys might not be meeting anymore, because the requirements have slightly changed a little bit. That being said, if all the requirements are there, the upgrade process is not a long upgrade process. What we typically do is we advise you that we will be working on the environment for around 1 to 2 hours, just in case of anything going wrong. But the upgrade process is basically us turning off SCI, taking a backup of what's already there. So taking a backup of the central point folder, the database, and once those backups are done, we take a look at how the server is configured so that we put everything back to how it was. And we then install the latest version and upgrade the database as is. It's not a process that takes a long time to do. It's just we also take time to validate the system afterwards to make sure that there's nothing that was broken by the upgrade, which should not happen. Because it's more of an upgrade on the aesthetic than anything else, and a few key features that are added. But the upgrade process is very smooth and very quick, and we take a backup of the Nectari database and the central point so that if ever anything goes wrong, we can always revert back to what was there before, which we don't plan to, but it's always something that we do in case of anything. So the upgrade process is turning off Nectari for 1 to 2 hours maximum, and then we do the upgrade, and then after the upgrade, we give you access to the website to go navigate inside the application. On the other standpoint of view, the only thing that really needs to be done after installing version 9 from a version 8 or version 7 is to upgrade the Excel add-ins that are installed on the different workstations. So it's going through the different workstations, uninstalling the previous one and installing the new one there. There are ways of uninstalling it and installing it with an offline mode, which basically you can create a command line that will allow you to install Excel without having to go workstation by workstation. So with kind of like a GPO, where you say, uninstall the previous one and install the new one. It's always something that we can guide you guys on, insisting you guys to do. If you guys have a lot of customers located a bit of everywhere, it's something that we can guide you on how to make the upgrade process as seamless as possible. And then it's just a question of having the users connecting to this new website. If you want, there's always a way that we can install Nectari on a separate server or a different server so that you can have version 8 and version 9 running at the same time, or version 7 if you guys are still at version 7, so that you can keep temporarily both systems up and running for the transition. But users should not be affected by this upgrade because most of the features and all of the objects are relatively located at the same location. And it's just basically the visual that has changed on the end user standpoint of view. So for the end user, the Excel add-in has not changed. So they will not necessarily notice a big difference going from one version to the other for working perspective, because all the buttons are at the same place. And for the web, it's very similar to where we added enhancements to be able to do certain things, but on an end user perspective, they'll notice the change, but they won't be lost inside that change. It's not a long upgrade process at all. And if you guys want to install the data sync, it's not necessarily a long process either. It's just a question of us connecting to the environment or guiding you guys to do it. But it's us installing the application and configuring the new data sync databases. It's just important to really take the time to look at the new requirements that are needed to utilize the data sync, because there's some new technology that we're using to be able to do what we're doing. And it's important to make sure that those servers are up and running. And I believe, for example, the system requirements for SQL is now 2012. So it might require us to have to move certain things aside. The other key things that we've added with the version 9 is really the UDM. And yeah, and I believe Olivia just joined us.
I'm here, sorry about that.
Before we go to Olivia, does anyone have any questions about the upgrading process or anything that was seen during this presentation? Barry said, Olivia, is that a new employee? I believe she is. She's the new improved Olivia. So she'll introduce herself very soon.
Yeah, very, very funny, very funny.
Is there any other questions from anyone? I'll leave it open for the next minute or two for questions, and then we'll let Olivia close off the final session of the new the COVID training, we'll call it. Okay, that being said, if you guys have any questions related to this, okay, so we do have Dinesh that asked a question, when will this recording the recordings be available? Right after all the webinars are done, they'll bring them all together and share the links to everyone that was inside these trainings. If ever you guys have any questions related to anything related to the 5 sessions or want more information, don't hesitate to get into contact with us. Like I said earlier too, if you guys have any questions on or any suggestions on future enhancements, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're glad to listen to you guys, and we're glad to help you guys with any question that you guys might have and so on. And Dinesh, I don't think there's going to be any practice VMs associated to this right here, but you can always discuss with the account managers to see if there's something that we can give you guys to access the V9 environment to play around with it. Perfect. So if there's, of course, you'll get all of the recordings, even if you were just at this session right here. Okay, perfect. So I'll let Olivia.
Thanks, Jean-Guy. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, cool. Well, I just want to say, obviously, it's the end of the free Nectari training sessions. So thank you, first of all, to all of our trainers who participated. Jean-Guy, thank you. And thank you, obviously, to all of our customers who attended, whether it be one session or attended all the sessions. We really appreciate your participation. And of course, we hope that you got a lot out of it. And if you weren't on version 9 before, we definitely hope that you'll consider making the move to V9, because all of the features and functionality definitely make it worth it. Even, you know, the new look and feel of the interface, so on and so forth. Again, just a quick reminder, I know Jean-Guy mentioned it because there was a question about it in the chat, but the recordings will be sent out. We're hoping to get those out to you by no later than Monday. So we will be sending out a YouTube, I believe, playlist with all of the different sessions as part of it. So look forward to that early next week, like I said, Monday. And again, there's a promotion right now if you're looking to add users, viewers, or maybe some of the new data sync modules, 25% discount on the licenses until June 30th. My name is Olivia. Obviously, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. And again, thanks to everyone for attending, and I hope that we'll be together in person again soon, although I don't know when that's going to happen at this point, but we definitely look forward to seeing you hopefully in the near future. So that being said, wishing everybody a wonderful day and a great rest of the week. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.